Father, we thank you for your great love towards us. Help us to realize more and more that that love is powerful. It means to do what you say. Help us to cooperate with you. May we spend the time to hear your voice, to understand your will, and to follow. Bless us now as we open some familiar pages. May we learn new things. May we see that there's always something to know, that you have more to tell us. We thank you in Jesus' precious name. Amen. Talking with HMS Richards one day, he said, when you're dealing with the people, it's best to do 90% familiar material and then give them just 10% new stuff. And I'm sure that's wise. I've never been able to do that. I figure we don't have time to be messing with that 90% we know. We need to be stretching all the time. And if there are things that are hard to get a hold of, we just need to spend the time working on it. Today we're going to start into something that I'm sure we all know. We've all been there. And maybe we think there's not a whole lot to learn from it that we haven't seen already. But maybe there is something. Let's see what we do here. We're going to begin talking today about the Exodus. Now, of course, right away you have all kinds of things flashing in your head. You know lots about the Exodus. I hope you have never seen the movie The Ten Commandments, because if you did, you're in big trouble. You've got the wrong pictures flashing in your head right now. And you can't help it. There's nothing you can do about it. Because once you do that, and it's in the brain, you've lost control. Yeah, that's the way it is. If anybody here has seen it, tell me you don't see Charlton Heston. Tell me you don't see it. The devil knows what he's doing, and we've all been there already. We just need to stop doing it. All right, we're going to talk about the Exodus, and we're going to try to go back and see some things to help us understand what really was happening there. And to help us, instead of reading the King James, because we all know those words, I have the Jewish Bible, the Tanakh. This is the most up-to-date Jewish Bible there is. This is the one they read. And there are some things they miss because, you know, they're Jews and they're seeing it from a different perspective. They're not seeing it like Moses did. They're not seeing it like Abraham did. They're seeing it like Jews after the divorce. But it's very well done. There's good scholarship in here. And there are some places where it reads better than the King James. So there, you have to balance it out. You have to figure out what you're doing here. All right. I'm not going to read it all to you. You can pick up a Tanakh someplace and read it. But I need to follow some sort of a plan. So we're going to start on chapter 1. And just pick out a couple of things that are familiar, and then we'll start moving. All right, in this version, it begins by saying, these are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob. And of course it names the 12 sons. And then it says that the whole household wasn't those sons, though. The sons had people with him, and the father had sons, people with him. And the total number of people that came with Jacob to Egypt was 70 people. Remember that? 70 people. Now, I think that's a good place to start, because what we're dealing with here is them moving over there because times were rough. Bad economic times. They couldn't grow things, but Joseph had taken care of things. The Lord showed him, and they had plenty to eat. And so he said, come over here. You come over here, and everything will be okay. So 70 people moved to Egypt. Now, I don't know if you have thought about it, but why would 70 people move over to a hostile place? Well, that's not enough. Have you ever considered that when they moved there, it wasn't hostile? You see, we've been watching too many movies. We need to go into history and see what's really going on. And of course, even the scholars have a hard time with this because they don't know where to put these things. We're going to look at it and see if we can put the things, if we just follow the Bible. One of the first things we might notice is the history of Egypt itself. Egypt had different kinds of rulers. They came from different places. During this time in history, or just before it, Egypt was conquered by a people that came from Asia. They were Asiatics. They were known as Hyksos. Hyksos. And these people were pretty advanced, actually. And one of the things that helped them was they had horses. They brought horses to Egypt. There were no horses before this. Now, if you study Egyptian history, you will find out that the Egyptians didn't even use camels to ride in. That's in movies. They walked every place. They were walkers. They did not ride. But when the Hyksos came, they brought their horses, and this is a brand new thing. This is wonderful. But the thing that I want you to understand with me here as we begin is that the Hyksos were not Egyptians. They were from Asia, the same place the Hebrews came from. Are you starting to get a picture here? Egypt was being run by people the same race as the Hebrews. So when Jacob came, and when Joseph had already been there and he was a big shot, why was he a big shot? It wasn't just because he brought him food. Everybody got along. They were the same race. So Joseph and the Pharaoh and everybody got along, and they said, hey, bring your folks. 70 people came there. And everything was fine. Not this big conflict everybody has told us about. Okay? But there came a time when the Hyksos were conquered. See? The Egyptians got tired of being run by foreigners. And so they revolted. And they kicked the Hyksos out. And Joseph died. And now they had new pharaohs that didn't know Joseph. That's what the Bible says, isn't it? That's why they didn't know Joseph. They were a whole new dynasty. They had nothing to do with the previous pharaohs. And these guys were tough. Yeah, they knew they ran the world and they were going to run it their way. Okay? Now, I have always been bothered by every book I ever read that said nobody can tell when Moses lived and when all this stuff happened. And in all the commentaries, they say the same thing. Nobody can put it in history. It's a big mystery. Nobody can figure it out. Well, I'm sorry. You know what? The Bible tells us some things we can work with. There's not much, but there's something. Moses was in Egypt 40 years, right? We know that. We know he was born at a certain time, and we know he left Egypt 40 years later, and something happened when he was about 12 years old. Okay? Now, we know about the 12 years because that's not in the Bible. The scholars say he was 3 years old when he went to Pharaoh's house. No, he was about 12 years old. So we have three things to work with. When he was born, he was about 12 years old, and he was 40 years old. So I did something that I thought might be useful. I mapped out Egyptian history, and then I took my 40 years on a separate little scale, and I went like this. And I went through Egyptian history. And you know what? Bing! It stopped right here. And that worked, and that worked, and that worked. And I looked at it carefully to be sure I got the right Egyptian history. I'm going to show it to you, and you see what you think. That's the first date we'll work with. The 18th dynasty began with a pharaoh called Ahmose. The next pharaoh was Amenhotep the First. Now, they were too soon to be part of what Moses did. It's easy to see that. They were just not at the right time. But Thutmose the First, all of a sudden, that fits the time frame, and we'll see. He began to reign in 1525. All right. Thutmose the First. Now, he reigned until 1508. This is all BC. At which time he died. Now, the interesting thing, historically, is he had a daughter. That is known in history by name. So, he had a daughter. Remember that. Now, the Egyptian histories tell us that he did not have a legitimate heir. Nobody to be pharaoh from the royal household. He didn't have any sons. But the Egyptians, the Egyptians found somebody that they figured was close enough, and they would make him the pharaoh. The only problem was he was just a child. Just a little kid. And I said, well, he can't be the pharaoh. He's not old enough. He doesn't know anything. But they made him a pharaoh with somebody to help him. And guess who that was? The daughter. She was a legitimate royal blood. So she was the pharaoh in this child's place while he was growing up. This is all Egyptian history. Her name was Hatshepsut. And this name is very up to date because right now the world of scholarship is trying to figure out who she was and what she did, because her name has been wiped out from history. There's nothing to work from except knowing this. She was the daughter of that Pharaoh. Now she reigned for 22 years. And the Pharaoh that became Thutmose II was with her for those 22 years. Okay? I'm sorry. I misspoke. Thutmose II I got there too quick. Thutmose II, there's a 4-year period in there where there was a Pharaoh, but he died. See? And she, for 22 years, was with Thutmose III. All right, now we've got it right. The little child was Thutmose III. I'll straighten this out as we go. So they're together for those 22 years. But all of a sudden, Hatshepsut disappears from history. After 22 years, she's gone. And nobody has ever figured out what happened to her. And all the big buildings she built and all the monuments and everything that had her name on them have somebody else's name on them. Yeah, they're all taken away. There's hardly anything to work with. Everything was taken away. Somebody did a real hard work of getting her out of history. And nobody knows why. I would like to show you a reason why from the Bible. Those 22 years, that 4 years, that 17 years, is 43 years. Now that's an interesting number, isn't it? 43 years. Well, when I made my graph and I did Moses, boom, that's where it stopped, right there. His 40 years stopped in these 43 years. Now, before I put Moses in there, okay, before I put Moses in there, I want you to realize where we are. (1482). Now, this is the end of this period. 43 years. If we put Moses being born here, and we run in this way, Moses leaves Egypt at about the same time that Hatshepsut died. Okay? We're just working with dates right now. We're going to look at what the Bible says and see if these things fit together or not. Well, if Moses was born here, he was born when Hatshepsut was the princess of Egypt. So we have Moses, we have a princess, we have an oppressive king. These things are starting to come together here. All right, we will refer back to this chart after we begin seeing what the Bible says. I can't hardly read the verses in this Bible. Verse 8, it says, a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph, and he said to his people, look, the Israelite people are much too numerous for us. From 70 people. Something's happened here. How did they get to be numerous? Well, they figured out what makes babies, and they were making them. In 4 generations, they got to be 600,000 people. That's a lot of people. That is so many people that the commentaries say that's a wrong number. Yeah, you go and read all the commentaries. They'll say somebody wrote that number wrong. Must mean 600 families. No, it was 600,000 people. And it scared the Egyptians. Not because there were that many of them. It's because if they ever got together with the Hyksos, now there'd be a problem. See? They did not want them becoming part of the Hyksos army. And then they would come back and take them over again. So they said, we better watch this. There are getting to be too many of them. And so he said, let us deal shrewdly with them. There's a word play there I won't talk about right now in the Hebrew. It said, let us deal shrewdly with them so that they may not increase. Otherwise, in the event of war, they may join our enemies. Now, it doesn't say that way in the King James, but they understood that here, the Jewish writers. They were correct in that translation. All right. So they made taskmasters. There were no taskmasters before. They were a free people under the Hyksos pharaohs. They had their own land. They didn't even get taxed. Yeah, they paid no taxes. They were really in good with the pharaohs. But now there's a new pharaoh. And these new pharaohs said, wait a minute, we've been too lenient with them. I don't know how they got that way, but we're going to change things around here. We're going to put taskmasters on them. Well, what does that mean, taskmasters? They're going to start working them. They're no longer free. They're going to start working them. That's the first step. What kind of work did they give them? Well, out in Egypt, it's hot. It's very hot. And the first thing they did was make them work all day long in the sun. That hot sun. And they said, well, wait a minute, what is this? And then they gave them hard work to do, different kinds of jobs. And then they gave them something they knew would keep them busy, making bricks. Yeah, making bricks. I don't know if you know the physics of it, the physiology of it, but if you're standing in water all day long in the hot sun, things happen to your body. Yeah, you don't last very long. It is a well-documented thing that Pharaoh lost 20,000 people building some of his monuments out of 100,000. They just died, his own people. He said, we don't need to be losing our people like this. We got these people. So they decided to get tough with them. And this is the first step. Taskmasters. This is the first step toward making them slaves. Now, those taskmasters, of course, were Egyptians, and they didn't want them suffering either. So they said, we will make you some headmen Hebrews. We'll make officers out of the Hebrews, and if anybody suffers, it's going to be them, not our taskmasters. So, here we are. We're starting to get into familiar ground now. Things have changed. It says, the more they were oppressed, the more they increased. Yeah. And the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. They said, what are we going to do with these people? We can't slow them down. The Egyptians ruthlessly imposed upon the Israelites the various labors that they made them perform. They made them more bitter with harsh labor as mortar and bricks and all sorts of tasks in the field. So, that wasn't working. So we figured this would start killing them off, but it's not happening. So the Pharaoh thought about it and says, I got it. They have 2 midwives. 2 midwives for all those people? Yeah, that's all they had. 2 Hebrew midwives. And of course the scholars say, no, they weren't Hebrews. The scholars are always saying something that's not right. One of them's name was Sapphira. That's a Hebrew name. That's not an Egyptian name. And the word means beauty. She was a real beauty. And the other one's name meant brightness. She was beautiful too. So the Hebrews had these 2 beautiful midwives. And Pharaoh said, you 2 midwives, when the woman is on the stones, and scholars argue about that, it just means the place where they gave birth. You kill the male children and you save the females. The reason they want to save the females, they make nice slaves for all the households. They'd have lots of people for the households. But the males they didn't want. And so after a while, Pharaoh noticed, wait a minute. We're still getting more babies than we want around here. How come? What's happening? So he called in these midwives. They said, what's going on here? And they said, we can't do that. We can't do that. I mean, what are we going to say to God? Now, that proves they were Hebrews. The Egyptians would not have said that. They said, we can't do this. The Pharaoh's getting exasperated now. He said, wait a minute. All right, get out of here. So he put out an edict. Every person in Egypt is authorized to kill Hebrew males. The young ones, not the ones who are working. He needs them. But babies are to be killed. He says, drop them in the Nile. And so the Hebrews are starting to really feel the pinch now. This is a different kind of thing we're living under here. This is not like it was before. And this Pharaoh is getting tough. Well, the Nile was supposed to be the place where you do it. All right, let's see what chapter 2, how it begins. A certain man of the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. The woman conceived, bore a son, and when she saw how beautiful he was, she hid him for 3 months. Now, I've got to talk to you about this verse a little bit because there's not a lot going on there that you can get attached to unless you know what the rest of the Bible says. Then you can begin putting it together. But this this Levite man was Kohath. No, he wasn't. Kohath was the son of Levi. I better write this so we can see it. Here's Levi, son of Jacob. Levi had Kohath, and Kohath had Amram. Amram is the one being mentioned here. He married a Levite woman. What was her name? Jochebed. Okay, so Amram marries Jochebed. Now, I'm going to tell you something here, and then I will prove it. Moses was the great-grandson of Levi, but he was also the grandson of Levi. When I first saw it, I said, wait a minute, the Bible doesn't talk about it. How come? That's a very unusual thing, that Moses was the grandson of Levi, and he was the great-grandson of Levi. Now, how can that be? That's why I wrote it down. Levi was the father of Kohath, but he was also the father of Jochebed. Jochebed was the sister of Kohath. And when Amram married her, he married his aunt. So if you follow it this way, Moses was the great-grandson of Levi. But if you follow it this way, he's the grandson. Now, I think that's one you probably didn't know before today. So we're into new material. But that's in the Bible. But I better show it to you. It's in Exodus, the 6th chapter, verse 20. I'm sorry. It's verse, where am I? 5, 6. I can't see the numbers in this. Yeah, it's verse 20. It says, Amram took to wife his father's sister Jochebed, and she bore him Aaron and Moses. There it is. It's always been in the Bible. I was going to ask you earlier if all of you have read the book of Exodus. That's been there the whole time. We think we have read Exodus. We think we have read Genesis. We think we have read... I'm sorry. We need to go back and start reading again, because there's lots there we never saw. This is just one little thing. Okay, so now we know Levi was the grandpa and the great-grandpa of Moses. Now, it says, a certain man and a Levite woman. The woman conceived, bore a son, and when she saw how beautiful he was, she hid him for 3 months. What does it mean? She saw he was beautiful. Aren't all babies beautiful? Don't all mothers think that? The Bible says this for a reason, because when she looked at him, she knew there's something different about this child. Now, she could say that because when he was born, Miriam was already a teenager. See? Which means she and her husband had been married at least 12, 13 years already when this happened. So we have another time thing happening here. These time things are happening all the time, and if you put them in slots, you can begin lining them up. Okay? She also had a son. And in the verse we read in 6:20, it only named the sons. It didn't name Miriam at all. It's because in the genealogies, the women didn't count. It was just the sons. And the son was 3 years older than Moses. He was 3 years old when Moses was born. So now we know another interesting thing. If you get the age of either one of them all the way through their experience, you know how old the other one was. Now, when did Moses die? How old was he? 120. 3 times 40, right? 120. When did Aaron die? He was 3 years older than Moses, but he didn't live much beyond 120 himself. So there's a thing there we can work with. We'll come back to that sometime. All right. So it says a beautiful child. She saw this child is bright. There's some intelligence in him. Look at his proportions. He's built like an athlete already. Yeah. He's beautiful. His skin is perfect. But what kind of a child is this? And she knew this one is special. And she hid him for 3 months. She could have been killed for doing that. But she couldn't hide him anymore. I don't know why, but she couldn't hide him anymore. So she said, I've got to do something here. Well, she trusted God. She says, I will do my part and I'll leave it with the Father. So in the King James it said she made an ark. Well, the word for ark there is not like the ark the other places. The ark was a box. It was not a boat. It was a box. That's what the word means. But it says that she made it out of bulrushes in the King James. And the word bulrushes there actually means papyrus. Okay. Now, I don't know if you have ever seen papyrus. Do you know what papyrus is?
Yeah. Pastor Logan brought
How tall does it get? It can go to 15 feet. It's not a simple little plant. I mean, you're talking about. And it's shaped triangular. As you look down at it, it looks like a triangle, which makes it very strong, very hard to break. And in the time of the Egyptians, they used to make little boats with it, real boats. And so maybe that's where she got the idea. I'll make something that floats like a boat. I'll make me a little box out of this papyrus. And that's what she did. She put pitch in it. She made it all waterproof. And she set it all up. And she made herself something that would float. And she put Moses in there. So she went down to the water. And of course, Miriam was standing by, pretending like she didn't know anything, and just kind of watching to see what would happen. And the princess came down there. It must have been in the morning, because during that time of history, the royalty would go down to the Nile because it was sacred and wash for the day. They would be part of the gods then. And so the princess came down there with her slaves, and she spotted something, and she said, go see what that is. So they went over and they got it, and they brought it to her, and she looked inside, and she saw this beautiful baby, okay? Remember that she saw the same thing her mother saw, and the Bible doesn't say that. But it had to be the same thing. She looked at it, and the baby cried. It stopped her. And she sized it up just like this. My father is killing all of these. Yeah, not this one. That hit her immediately. Not this one. This one I'm going to keep. And she made up her mind right away. This is my baby. No, this is Pharaoh's daughter. Who's going to tell her she can't do this? And she knew it. She knew it. Well, Miriam woke up all of a sudden. She said, oh, what'd you find? What'd you find? Oh, a little baby. Would you like somebody to take care of it for you and nurse it? And the daughter said, that's a good idea. Yeah, okay. You find me somebody and we'll do it. She said, I know somebody. She brought her mother back and she said, will you do this? She said, oh yes, I'll take care of it. Now, when the King James talks about it, it does not say the mother anymore. The woman. The woman. That's her. Why does the Bible do that? The Bible's trying to tell us something. She mustn't let on. She knows this child. Or she's dead.
Yeah.
She's got to be totally objective and I'll take the job. And so Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go ahead, you take care of it for me, and I'll pay you your wages. Now, she did that for a reason, too. There had to be some sort of a legitimate relationship between her and this woman and that baby. And that relationship was created by her paying her for doing a job. No one could say anything then. Well, the Bible doesn't say this. But you begin putting things together after you read the Word of God for a certain amount of time. The population never would have gotten to 600,000 men if Pharaoh had kept up his thing about killing babies. It never would have happened. So somewhere along the line there, he called it off. And he said, all right, we won't do this anymore. Put this in the scenario. The daughter has her little baby that's getting ready, and she goes to her father and says, you know, this is really bad that you're killing these babies. Oh, it's bad. You shouldn't be doing that. And she probably pestered him about it till he finally said, okay, it's not working anyhow. It's not working anyhow. I think she probably stopped it. And if she did, if she was instrumental in stopping the death of all the children, Moses, as a little baby, was already saving the Israelites. In a passive way, but he was involved, see? And the reason I can go this way is because this is the way God does things. If you know how he does things and you see it over and over, you see, yeah, this will work. This fits the patterns. God does this, and this one doesn't know he did it, but he did it, and everything's working together. So, Moses is born here under Thutmose I. Hatshepsut is a young woman. She says, that's my baby. But he does not become hers officially until he's 12 years old. Thutmose I sees this baby at age 12 after his mother has trained him for 12 years in the Hebrew ways. And he is bright and he knows a lot about the scriptures and about God. He has made commitments. And Pharaoh sees this young man. He says, now this is different. Yeah, this is different. I don't have an heir. Not only is he her son, he's my grandson. And he sets it down. He says, this is going to be the next Pharaoh. Set him up. And from that time, Moses is in school to be a Pharaoh. This brilliant person, this fantastic mind, this physical specimen, this fantastic human is going to be the next Pharaoh of Egypt, the mightiest man in the world. Yeah. And so they're training him. Philosophy, poetry, engineering, commander of the armies, a priest of the Egyptian religion. And that's where Moses balked. He says, no, I'll do all the other stuff, but I don't serve other gods. Yes, they knew Moses was a Hebrew. They certainly did know that. But he was such a fantastic individual. They said, we'll overlook that. We'll overlook that. We'll make an Egyptian. And so he never had hair because Egyptians shaved their head. He had a bald head, and he wore Egyptian clothes, and he walked like an Egyptian. He did everything like an Egyptian. He was an Egyptian. He was not just an Egyptian, he was going to be Pharaoh Egyptian. And so no doubt he went out and led some campaigns and battles and won. They said, he's a mighty general, this one. What a Pharaoh he's going to be. He knew economics. He knew everything. He was just, nobody could have made a better Pharaoh than him. And so Hatshepsut, his mother, is running Egypt, remember? And she's not only running Egypt, she's got the next Pharaoh here. But there's a problem. Thutmose III is growing up all through this. And he's the Pharaoh. The present Pharaoh, even though Hatshepsut's doing everything. And I'm sure, even though he and Moses probably played together, they learned together, he probably got it in his head, he's going to try to take my place. And everybody is setting up for it. You can know he wasn't too happy about that. So time goes along. But Moses, with all of his intelligence, with all of his, he was a little big-headed because he told him, I don't need to do everything your way. I am not going to be a priest. I'll do all your other things, but I will not be one of your priests. But it was a law in Egypt. If you weren't a priest, you couldn't be a Pharaoh. And so what he was saying was, I don't care about your laws. Well, how can you be Pharaoh and not care about the laws? And so he was really setting himself up. But he thought he was too big a big shot for anybody to, he's going to be Pharaoh anyhow. Where does Ramses come in? Not during this time. He comes later. By the way, his name was not Ramses. His name was Ramos. All of them. All the pharaohs at this time, well, not all of them. There was Amenhotep. But most of the 18th dynasty pharaohs had the name Mos attached to it. The word Mos, M-O-S-E, meant child. And in the name, it meant child of. Thutmose. Mos was the child of the god Tot. See? Child of Tot. Well, there's no more on here, but there was Amos, the child of the god Ah. Ramos was the child of the sun god. Okay? And so all the Moses were the children of a god. Now, the Bible says that princess, Hatshepsut, named Moses, but I don't think so. I think she named him Irimos. Irimos in Egyptian means child of the Nile god. See? But Moses said, you can't do that to me when he got old enough. I will not take the name of that Nile god. I belong to the one living God. And so they called him Mos. They left off the God part. The Egyptians called him Mos. But the Hebrews later, they didn't like his having an Egyptian name, so they called him Moshe, which is very close. They say he can get along with that, Moshe. And Moshe means taken out of. So he had been taken out of the water. So that worked. Child of the Nile are taken out of the... But all these little things are hiding in the Bible that we don't think about. All right. So all of this is going on, and we're not into chapter 2 yet. Yeah. All right. So it says, the daughter of Pharaoh came down, and all of this happened. Sometime after that, verse 11. Oh, by the way, what I just went through is in verse 10. It says, she named him Moses, explaining, I drew him out of the water. Well, that's the Hebrew version. Her version was a little different. Out of the Nile. Nile, God. All right. Verse 11. Sometime after that, when Moses had grown up, he went to his kinfolk and witnessed their labors. Now, why did he go there? He knew the bad time they were having. He wanted to see it. He wanted to praise it. He wanted to see firsthand how they're treating my people. He knew he wasn't an Egyptian. He didn't feel like an Egyptian. He didn't think like an Egyptian except for the education. He said, that's where I belong, with these people. He went over there to see. And the first thing he saw was somebody beating up on him. Yeah, an Egyptian. And so he looked around. And he took care of that Egyptian. And he buried him, got it all out of the way, and went on his way. And the next day, he was there looking around, and now he saw two of the Hebrews fussing. And he went over and he said, why are you doing that? He said, you shouldn't do that with each other. And the one came up to him and said, who made you a ruler over us? Oh, now they're talking to the next Pharaoh. Remember that. Who made you? They knew he was a mighty man. How could they talk to him like that? But they had a way they could talk to him like that. They said, are you going to kill us like you did the Egyptian? Oh, they were going to blackmail him. And he all of a sudden says, oh, it's out? What happened to that Egyptian? He knew. Oh, it's a bad day in Egypt. They know about the Egyptian. And of course, they started blabbing. And the word got out And it got to Pharaoh. Thutmose the third. And he's been looking for a reason. Yeah, he said, that man is dangerous. We thought the Hyksos was bad. That man is dangerous. He has to die. Now, I'm going to give you a little speculation now, because the Bible doesn't say it, and there's no history. No scholar has been able to put it together. But based on what we have seen so far in the Bible and history, Hatshepsut was still alive up to this point in time. But now she had a problem because she was the chief supporter of Moses for Pharaoh. And now Thutmose III says he's got to die. See? Prior to this, they had told Moses, if you keep saying you won't be a priest, the princess is going to disown you. That was the threat they had over him. Well, she never would have done that, but that's what they said. See? But now she has a problem. And the Bible doesn't get anywhere near that. She is a supporter of Moses. Moses is now 40 years old. And Hatshepsut has now ruled for 22 years, and she disappears from history. Yeah, it seems to me that Thutmose III wasn't going to take any chances. He's going to die, but she's got to go too, right now. Now, there's another interesting thing. She had a prime minister who was a very powerful man in Egypt. He was powerful. He was like a pharaoh himself. Another bright man. And he disappears at the same time. That's Egyptian history. Now, it seems to me somebody should have put that together a long time ago. Her prime minister and her both at the same time? But the interesting thing is, Moses disappears at the same time also. So 3 people disappear from Egypt all at the same time. And as far as I can tell, my little chart up here is working with these numbers. Now, the historians have said, well, why don't we find anything about Moses? We can't find Moses anywhere in history. We don't know where to put him. Well, of course you don't know where to put him, because the Egyptians, Thutmose III, had every vestige of a record of Moses wiped out. There's nothing to find. That was his rival. And the Egyptians don't have rivals. They never record a disappointment. They never record a humiliation. They never record a battle they lost. And they sure don't keep a record of Moses. So Moses, Hatshepsut, and the prime minister. The prime minister stays in history, but Hatshepsut and Moses disappear. Now, there was a little interesting sentence in the Spirit of Prophecy that caught my attention one time. It says, Pharaoh said he must die. And he made the decision immediately. That's what Spirit of Prophecy says. He must die. The next sentence says, it became known to Moses and he fled. Wait a minute. The Spirit of Prophecy says, it became known to Moses. I can think of 2 ways it would have been known to him. Either Hatshepsut got the word to him, you better get out of town. It's over. Or After Hatshepsut was killed, one of her people got to Moses and said, they killed your mother. That's one of the two ways. But one of the two ways it had something to do with Hatshepsut. And he left. He was gone. Now, the Bible doesn't get into any of these things, but we need to be able to put ourselves into it to see what's going on here. What's the history here? How did this happen? Don't leave holes in your head. Just say, that happened, that happened, that happened, and you don't know how anything connects. Now, Moses, this mighty general, with his fancy clothes. Yeah, they only dressed in linens. Those people never dressed in anything but linens. Starts out across the desert on foot with no food and no water. And nobody can do that in the desert. Especially a fancy pants like Moses. This man is used to luxury. This man is used to sitting down anytime he wants to sit down. This man is used to having the best food. This man is a pharaoh. And now he's out in the desert all by himself. And he's got to stay alive. I'm sure he had a tough time. But the Bible just keeps skipping over things because the Bible has important things to tell us. We have to fill in these things. Now, what is he leaving behind? The Bible doesn't tell us that either. You have to know it. You have to see it. It's there, but there's no words for it. What is he leaving behind? Well, he's leaving behind one mad Pharaoh, for sure. Probably he's left behind a dead mother of 22 years. But the thing that he left behind that he's going to pay for later is the Hebrew people who see him running away after he killed an Egyptian. That's what he's leaving behind. A people that have to reject him based on his own actions. But it's going to take 40 years for that to catch up to him. That's if he lives 40 years. I mean, he's got to get through that desert first. He's out there. Tough shape. Where are we here for time? Okay. Is there something I want to tell you here that I haven't done yet? No, here we go. All right, so you know the stories. I'm just trying to fill in some things. All right, let's go on here. I'm just not that familiar with his Tanakh to hit in the right places. Okay, it's in the middle of chapter 2. That's where we are. Okay, here we are. Now the priest of Midian. Now that comes out of nowhere. Moses is wandering around in the desert just trying to stay alive. And the Bible now says, now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. They came to draw water, and they filled the troughs to water their father's flock. But shepherds came and drove them off. Moses rose to their defense, and he watered their flock. So he was pretty tough, wasn't he? And he didn't fight like those dumb shepherds. This man was a trained warrior. Yeah. And he could take on a dozen of them with no problem. He was a general. And in those days, generals didn't say, you go over there. The generals said, follow me. They were first. Okay. When they returned to their father Reuel. Do you get that? His name is Reuel. He's a Midianite named Reuel. He said, how is it you have come back so soon today? And they answered, an Egyptian rescued us. Well, how'd they know he was an Egyptian? Well, he had a bald head. He had Egyptian clothes. He was an Egyptian. And so he even drew water for us, and he watered the flock. And so Reuel said, where is he then? Where'd you leave the man? Ask him to break bread. Moses consented to stay with the man. He gave Moses his daughter Zipporah to wife. Now that happens all really fast. Of course, it didn't happen that day. Moses came in, and he realized, I don't have any way of living. I have no way of finding food for myself. I don't know how to, do the food thing. And so Reuel told him, why don't you work for me? And Moses said, that's a good idea. That's a really good idea. Later on, the King James says that Moses was tending his flock. Well, no, it wasn't his flock. It was Reuel's flock. So Moses now has a job. And there are 7 daughters. And Zipporah, they get along. And eventually, they get married. Now, she must have been something, because she treated Moses different than anybody else did. She told him what was what. Yeah. I think she was part of his humbling process. Women can do that. They can really make you humble. Doesn't matter how the world sees you. All right. So it says here, she bore a son, whom he named Gershom. And Gershom means affliction, something like that. So he's talking about what happened to him. He's out here in his affliction. He's going to name his son Affliction. For he says, I've been a stranger in a foreign land. A long time after that, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites were groaning under the bondage and cried out, and their cry for help, the bondage, rose up to God. God heard their moaning, and God remembered his covenant. God looked upon the Israelites, and God took notice of them. Well, a long time after that must mean 40 years later. See, God's ready to do something again because he's getting things ready. He's been getting them ready for 80 years. Do you see that? And by the way, when Moses went out there for 40 years, remember where the Israelites were for 40 years. They were still back there suffering. 40 more years. And we didn't do it, but when they got in trouble, the Egyptians had a very interesting way of punishing people. They would set them down and put their feet out, and then they would hit them hard on the soles of their feet. If you've never had that done to you, don't ask for it. Your feet are so tender. Oh, you have so many nerves down there. When you have diabetes, that's the first thing doctors test. They get a little teeny piece of plastic, and they do this to your feet, the bottom of your feet, to see if you still have all that sensitivity. If it's leaving, you have a problem. Diabetes is killing you. But the Egyptians knew that trick a long time ago, only they didn't use little pieces of plastic. They hit you enough times on the bottom of your feet, you're dead. You die. You can't take it. Yes, it'll kill you. They killed all kinds of people that way. And that's how they punished the Hebrews. Bottom of the feet. Reuel, Midianites. Who are the Midianites? Yeah, they're in the Bible, but who are they? All right, we have to go back to another story. You remember the story of Abraham. Sometime we'll go through that if we have time. Abraham. You remember that when God told him he was going to have a child? How did he relate to that? Yeah. He says, I'm about 100 years old. I'm really up there. Me have a child. Me. And my wife, she's not a young chicken either.
She really laughed.
He said, I can't have children. And God said, now, wait a minute. I told you you're going to have a son.
He had a whole bunch after that.
And, of course, it didn't happen for a while. 75 years and up. So you know that he tried to help out. The wife tried to help out. And, I've seen every time, I shouldn't say this on tape, but every time one of God's men went wrong, they listened to their wife. Yeah. You track that sometime. Over and over, the wife says something, does something. Moses later in this story, he was supposed to circumcise his children, his boys. And his wife said, no. And that was that. And God later came along and said, I don't think I want to use you as my leader. You didn't obey me. You deserve to die.
I don't know about that.
Yeah.
I don't know about that.
Oh, yeah, Zipporah.
Because Sarah was his sister.
Well, he lied on his own.
Yeah. Twice.
But she was so beautiful, what else could he do?
Just depends on who's telling the
No,
story.
I didn't say 100%. I just said you track it. All right, I don't want to get off here. I shouldn't bring in these asides.
You want us to get you on the bottom?
Abraham. We're not going to go through the story. I just want you to remember that Abraham said, no way, I'm sorry. And when his wife laughed, he laughed too. I mean, they both laughed. They said, come on, have a child, us. And so you know what happened with the Arabs, how they got started. And eventually the son of promise came. And they laughed again. Only this time they were laughing for joy. And they called him Yitzhak. That means laughter. So they laughed their way through the whole thing. But then after Sarah died,
I know.
did he retire?
No.
He married another woman. He's over 100 years old, and he says, I can't live alone. So he married a woman named Keturah.
I had a whole slew of them.
Now this old man, who couldn't have a child, and he laughed about it, had 8 more children with Keturah.
One of those was me.
8 more sons. And that was without God's help. Yeah, he had 8 more sons, and one of them was the father of the Midianites. So the Midianites were part of Abraham. And this priest out there in the middle of nowhere, well, it was close to Mount Horeb. Do you know what Mount Horeb is? That's Mount Sinai. All this is happening at Sinai. So this Midianite priest, a priest of God, he's a true believer. He's part of Abraham's line. And the Bible says his name is Ruel. But we all here know that when the father-in-law of Moses came to him later about these 70 men that should be helping him, that's not what he's called.
Jethro.
He's got about 4 names in the Bible. One of them is Jether, and the one we know is Jethro. So this is Jethro, Ruel. And Moses is a family man. He's got a lovely wife who almost got him in trouble. And the 40 years is up. God is working his program. Because there's a prophecy that was made a long time ago that is in the process of fulfillment now. 430 years have to be fulfilled, and then the prophecy will hit. Bang! And the Bible tells us the prophecy was fulfilled on the very day that the 130 years were finished. That's how God does things. Now notice what God has had to do so far. For 80 years, he's been getting everybody ready to keep things funneling towards that one day. That's the kind of a God we serve. That's why I said last week, we are never going to finish the work. You can go out there and run up and down the streets all you want. You're not going to finish the work until God says it's time, and then it's going to happen. We need to be ready in our own personal salvation. We need to love people. We need to expose them. We need to do Bible readings, all of it. We need to do all of those things. But not because we think we're finishing the work. God has to get a whole world ready to finish the work. He's got to get world leaders ready. He's got to get populations ready. He has to get economies ready. He has to get churches so messed up people say, I don't want that anymore. And he has to get us ready. Isn't that something? He doesn't even have a people to work with yet. I'm sorry. We're a sad excuse for the people of God. As a matter of fact, I'm thinking right now I want to go up through chapter 19 in Exodus, and that's going to take us a while so we can see we're no different than the Israelites were. Yeah. Everything they did wrong, we're doing it again. I went over again. I'm sorry. Okay. So, here we are at Horeb. That's a good place to stop because chapter 3, we get to the burning bush, and we want to look at that very carefully. What's happening there? Okay. We'll continue next time. Father, we call you that, and we sense the privilege. But we somehow don't sense the power of it. You are not a mere Pharaoh, the mightiest man on earth. You are God. You are Jehovah. You are beyond our thinking. And even as we go through all of eternity, we will never catch but glimpses of who you are. Help us to understand some of what it means to be called your son, your daughter, to actually be called to be part of your family. Help us to recognize that you've been there in all history working it to make your plan work. That we can see in just 2 chapters here so far what you've been doing for 80 years in the lives of these people on this planet to get things ready so that your people will be delivered.